Hey everyone, this is the Financial Post headline. Well, it's William Watson, is the contributor. Why conservatives get called racist just for believing everyone should actually be equal. Nice headline. If, like MLK, Martin Luther King, you want people judged on content of character, you're biased against favored groups, says William Watson. Is conservatism necessarily racist? Are conservatives inevitably racist? Speaking as a conservative in the North American sense of favoring smaller governments, fewer laws, less regulation, lower taxes, and more scope for human beings to make their own decisions and govern their own lives rather than having it done for them by their betters, I certainly hope not. And I never thought so. But the question did come to mind as I read a review by Sam Tannenhaus in the latest issue of The Atlantic of A New History of American Conservatism by Duke University historian Nancy McLean. You can't tell a book by its cover, but you often can by its title, which in this case is Democracy in Chains. The deep history of the radical right's stealth plan for America. I hope actual stealth bombers do a better job of concealment than the right has done with its plan for America. I hear you there. For decades it has been carpet bombing any media that would grant it access. Stealth has not been its favorite mode of dissemination. So true, right? As if the conservatives are being stealthy about what their intentions or what their approach to morality, right? Or how we should cohabitate and coexist with each other. What, they were trying to keep that secret stealthy, right? Under the radar? Not. Have you ever seen a Christian that won't give you their opinion? Whatever, anyways. The deep history of the American conservative movement is that it started in the U.S. South. And y'all know about the South, right? A key figure is the economist, not the president, James Buchanan, a native of Tennessee who, with colleagues at the University of Virginia and later George Mason University, also in Virginia, founded the Public Choice School of Political Analysis. At its most basic, public choice is as anodyne as it sounds, an analysis of how governments make choices. Its identifying characteristics is that instead of assuming men are angels, it adopts the simple but powerful insight of economics that the people who run those governments, politicians and officials alike, are probably not indifferent to their own interests. Gee, you think? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. Public choice analysis leads to the conclusion that governments often do things that don't mainly benefit the average citizen or improve the common good or help the Canadian or American people, but instead satisfy the demands of the electoral cycle, the permanent bureaucracy, or the innumerable interest groups that come seeking gifts, which are known in the literature as rent seekers, right? With the activity being called rent seeking. The resulting distribution of resources involves widespread corruption in all but the legal meaning of the word. Not one bit of this will surprise anyone who has spent more than a few months observing democratic politics. No shit, right? No shit. Like I say, place your faith in this mystical entity called God. It's much wiser to do so than to place your faith in these central planning control freaks and sociopaths and authoritarians among us. Because those who govern us will always be self-interested, public choice analysis often leads to recommendations for less and smaller government, as well as public policies that are scrupulously neutral as between groups, including ethnic groups. These are hardly disreputable ideas. Martin Luther King Jr. himself dreamed of a day when people would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Small, neutral government also has a long intellectual history, if an imperfect implementation, in the United States. The Virginian who wrote America's mission statement declaimed ringingly that all men are created equal, even if he did own slaves. So why is conservatism supposedly racist? Two reasons. In the U.S. South in the middle of the last century, many people who favored smaller government and local control also defended the racial segregation that was then practiced across their region. Yes, their libertarianism may well have been a cloak for racism, but it's clearly possible to want the world to be run on Jeffersonian principles without favoring racial discrimination. In fact, the libertarians who helped build the public choice school argue that segregation would have been hard to maintain without state enforcement. If governments hadn't codified it in law, free and open markets would at least have eroded it and maybe even swept it away. Businesses that ignore a whole class of workers or customers lose money. The second reason conservatism is supposedly racist is that if we were to move to neutrality from a world that is now tilted towards different groups, doing so would remove those groups' special privileges. Thus, to prove you are not racist, you must accept a very intrusive government that, far from being colorblind, actively discriminates in favor of different groups. People who hold to content of his character standards are actually accused of promoting bias against the favored groups by wishing to end their legal privileges. So true. Few writers on the left venture all the way to saying Donald Trump's white working class and upper class supporters are racist. Often they confine themselves to labeling them as white nationalists, though in some ways that actually sounds worse. But it is really white nationalists to say that, whatever the color, people shouldn't have legislated advantages in labor markets. As a matter of logic, neutral can be characterized as anti-pro this group or that group. If this group or that had been given privileges, but what it really is neutral. And for the long run, neutral would be non-racist and best. Great article. And I agree with a fair amount of, not all, but I do think it's worth paying attention to and listening to and making a video about. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.